the President's answers to questions at the Symposium of Economic Growth of the American Bankers Association, from the Grand Ballroom of the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., February 25, 1963.
And I ask the question whether, in order to restore a stable economy and bring about growth in private industry, whether it isn't as essential that the government budget is balanced as it is in my business or in the banking business or any business.
Well, to go through a number of questions, which these number of answers which your statement and question suggest. In the first place, I don't think you've explained fully why we've lost gold. The fact of the matter is that private industry in this country has invested about $2.5 billion a year over the last 10 years. And that's a dollar drain. Now, it's matched against equity in the country that's involved. If Chrysler spends $65 million for Simca a month ago, that's a $65 million dollar loss for us. That dollar can end up as a potential drain in our gold. And as France keeps 75% of its reserves in gold, that's what 75% of that investment will end up as a gold loss. If Ford Motor Company spends $350 million 2 years ago to buy Ford in Great Britain, that ends up as a dollar loss and can end up, as Great Britain keeps 100% nearly of its reserves in gold, that can end up as a gold loss. Now, there are assets against that gold. They're not liquid in the sense that the dollar claim upon us is liquid, but there is an asset. There is a Simca company. There is a Ford company. There are dividends. Great Britain conducted for years investments overseas, which brought them and maintained their balance of payments between the wars, so that I'm not adverse to these investments overseas, but I do think we should point out, and in fact they bring back nearly $2.5 billion. But in pointing out the losses in dollars, it seems to me you oversimplify. We lose $1 billion in tourists every year. Now there's no asset against that loss, but it's $1 billion, and represents a dollar which can be cashed against us in gold. Now we have attempted to tie our purchases as much as possible, our military expenditures. We now tie about 80% of our aid to expenditures here in the United States, and we're trying to do it even better, so that we hope to cut that dollar loss or gold loss. And we're attempting to tie our military expenditures as much as we can and persuade our allies to pay a greater share of the burden, which they're well able to do. We have done that most recently with Italy, which is offsetting whatever expenditures we make in Italy. We've done it with Germany under the Gilpatrick-Strauss agreement, whereby the Germans pay to us as much as, and for new equipment for their army, what it costs us in dollars to maintain our 6 divisions in Western Germany. We still lose some in Spain, and we still lose some in France, we still lose some in Great Britain. And we lose about $300 million in Japan for military reasons, and we lose some in Vietnam and other places. So I quite agree with you that this is a matter which deserves our closest attention. We do have, however, $50 billion of assets, United States, overseas, in these investments, which are against the dollar. We still do have substantial gold reserves, where we still have a Western economy which is dependent upon the dollar. If you didn't have the dollar, then you'd have solely an economic system based on gold, and you would have a system which was so restrictive that you would have no economic development in the United States or trade or any other country. So I think it's a serious problem, but and one that we have to give a good deal of attention to. Now, your last point is that you seek a balanced budget, and so do I. But we spend about $52 billion for our Defense Department. We spend about $2 billion of our foreign aid. Also goes to our Defense Department to buy surplus military equipment, so we're not giving away quite as much as you think. We spend about $2.5 billion for our atomic energy, which is tied up with our national security. We spend $10 billion for interest on the debt, and some of you may even hold some of that debt, so that begins to move us up. Then we spend $5.5 billion for our veterans. Then we spend $6.5 billion for agriculture. But when we suggested last year that those who benefit from this program in agriculture, at least they should put some restraints upon their production, I heard many speeches made by manufacturers from Wisconsin and other places saying that this was an unfair interference by the federal government in free enterprise. So the result is that you buy all that they can produce for 75% of parity, and they can outproduce us as far as what our demand will be every year in agriculture, as really we could in any other commodity if we made up our minds, so that the economy, the budget moves up. Now, we have submitted a budget which provides for a reduction in expenditures with the exception of defense, space, and interest on the debt. Interest on the debt, which has to be refinanced at a higher rate than it was originally years ago, obviously there's an increased cost. Space is also important to our security and defense. And I don't know, the rest of the budget, even though we have an increase in population of several million, even though we're distributing, for example, in the post office, 1.5 million new addresses a year, even though we have many more children at school, and from 1960 to 1970, you're going to double the number of children trying to get into colleges, so that means you're going to have to build as many buildings in 10 years as you built in 150 years. We are still attempting to keep our economy under restraint. Our budget would be in good condition if our economy grew as fast as it ought to. Now, I accept your view that a budget balance, a balanced budget is desirable. But what I'm saying is that my opinion is that unless you get a tax cut this year, you increase the chances of a recession which will unbalance your budget to a far greater extent. I already said in my speech about President Eisenhower's 58 experience. $500 million surplus, and within a few months, it was $12.5 billion deficit. Well, now, if you have another recession with the deficit we have, then I think you'd be in a far more serious position. So I don't think, sir, that your alternative is, as you would hope, between a balanced budget and an unbalanced budget. My opinion is that the alternative today is between keeping this economy moving ahead and a recession. And in my judgment, the best medicine for that recession is a tax reduction.
Next question over there.
Mr. President, you mentioned in your remarks that increased expenditures of the government would constitute one alternative to tax reduction. I think it would be interesting if you would give us your reason for that choice.
Well, there are many people who feel that that's what we ought to do, that the cities and the towns of there's a good many problems. In fact, in the Washington Post this morning, I saw the National Housing Conference, which is meeting in Washington, is charging that the White House is lagging in its development of urban renewal, housing for the elderly, and passed, I believe, almost unanimously 10 resolutions, seven of which would result in an increase in governmental expenditure of $4 billion. So that if you run into a recession, you're going to have a good many people who feel that government expenditures will be needed. You're not going to have 6, 7, or 8, or 9 million people out of work in this country without somebody thinking something should be done about it. Something's going to be done about it. You're going to have either the government spending the money to keep them at work, or someone else is going to. You're not going to have them around unemployed and have the United States in these years as a leader of the free world accept it. Now, the fact of the matter is that if you take this action in time, I don't oversell it. I think we're going to have a lot of serious economic problems anyways. This is a very complicated economy at a particular point in its development. This I'm not overstating the desirability of the tax cut, but I think it's most useful at this time. But I do think that if we fail, and if we have a recession which is prolonged, and you have a great number of people out of work, then you're going to have a good many remedies that will be put forward. Some of the ones I suggested with increased governmental expenditures, 35-hour week, which already has been advanced by the AFL-CIO, and other proposals which I don't think are in our interest. The 35-hour week at today's cost would increase your cost about 14%, and that would just about price us out of the international market. So I'm against the 35-hour week. I think the thing to do is to take the action as I have said now.
Mr. President, I believe you said that you did not predict a recession in 1963. And you say that without a tax cut, we are liable to have a recession. Now, with tax cuts tied so close to tax reform, is it possible that the tax reform angle might delay this thing to the point where the tax cut stimulus might be lost?
Yes, well, I would be opposed to that. then quite obviously, what we suggested was a tax cut of over $13 billion and reforms which would bring in about $3 billion roughly of revenues, giving us a total tax cut of $10 billion. Now we felt that therefore the goal is the $10 billion tax cut in the length of time which we have recommended. If we cannot get the reform, then quite obviously you're going to have to rewrite the package. It might be possible to send up or for the Congress to pass a $10 billion tax cut without the reform, but that would mean changes, of course, in the rate reduction structure. So it was our feeling that from the national interest, even though I realize that some taxpayers may find it more desirable to have the simple $10 billion cut with consequent adjustments of all of the rates than they would the $13 billion cut with the reform, it may be that Congress will come to that conclusion. That isn't our judgment of the best action, but I quite agree that what we need is the bill this year, and nothing should stand in its way. Our feeling is that the best bill that can be gotten will be the one we recommended, but I would say the first priority is a bill. But we have to realize that if we don't get the reforms, then, of course, the tax bill would have to be rewritten unless the Congress made a judgment that it would accept a tax cut of $13 billion. Our concern is that they might take a tax cut of less than $10 billion, which would be, I think, a mistake. If we're going to do this, we might as well do it right or not do it at all. But that's the choice. But to answer your question, I would say the important thing is to get the bill this year. Whatever is necessary to get that bill, I would support.
Question over there. Let's look at that one.
Do not believe prospective budget deficits as well as the continuing deficit in our international balance statements make it even more important than previously to prevent wage rates from increasing faster than productivity?
I think that we ought to, that wage rates ought to follow. I would hope they would follow the general guidelines which have been suggested on several occasions, which are tied to the principle which you just described, that wage rates should be tied to productivity increases. The difficulty, of course, is arguing productivity increases and also discussing how increase in productivity should be divided. But I think the general principle is one we certainly support and continue to support. The fact of the matter is that it represents that, and the other point would be a real concentration by American corporations on the export market. We've never really given it, some companies have, the attention it deserves as a nation. But there are these markets throughout the world, and I would hope that every American corporation, that's the greatest contribution they could make. And as my earlier answer, the American businessman benefits, as well as our security, benefits from the dollar as an international mechanism. I would hope that they would concentrate as a national service, as well as one that would bring them a private return, would concentrate their energies on developing their export markets. That can make a great difference to us, and if management and labor can be responsible in the next year or two, and there is a concentration on export markets, I think we have a much better chance to lick the problem. One of the points that I think is worth making is that there are these dollars overseas which represent a call on our goal. If our economy is doing well, then I think that people will have confidence in the dollar, and that serves the whole Western community. If we were dependent only on gold, and gold, which after all increases by, $700 million a year probably, how could you possibly finance the tremendous movements of trade which we now have in the world unless you had sterling, the dollar, which gold supports? To just use gold would be back in 1929, and you'd have the most restrictive effect upon our economy and on our free flow of trade, and therefore on the defense of the Western world. What we're really talking about is not only the national security, but if the United States does not maintain its economy in good position, then Great Britain cannot afford to take those steps which will provide a stimulus to her economy at home. In addition, those countries in Latin America particularly, which sell their raw materials to us, will be depressed. So everything hangs on us. And so everything hangs upon our maintaining our economy effectively and maintaining the kind of discipline which your question suggests. Perhaps we'll have one more, because I know you have other speakers.
Mr. President, you've commented on the potential or possible recession and its magnitude, referring back to 58. Would you care to comment as to if your tax proposal is enacted, what the magnitude of the potential would be with regard to economic stimulation?
Well, I think that we've talked about the 3 or 4 times which stimulus, which a $10 billion tax cut would have, which would be $30 billion at 3 times, 300%, which we would hope, and also, of course, which would also bring a return in revenues. That's why we feel that the combination of the stimulation to our economy, of the multiplication factor of 3 times, and also the additional returns this would bring to federal revenues, makes us feel that the proposed tax cut is fiscally responsible. I don't, as I've said at the beginning, if we have any, if we were going to err, I would certainly err on the side of a large enough tax cut, not to go through this laborious, painful procedure which we're all going through, and then bring forth a mouse. I would hope that we would bring forth one that would do the job. Thank you very much.